Hello, welcome to day number 6 of the Bible in a Year, and I'll just add a few comments to what Father Schmitz has said about chapter 12 and chapter 13 of the book of Genesis. I remember doing a Bible study with some high school students once, and I started with chapter 12. You can sort of start reading the Bible at chapter 12 in a certain way because everything before that was kind of prehistory, kind of as Jeff Cavins says, it's the early world, and it's kind of before the history of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, the people of Israel, their history, their story really begins here in chapter 12 with what's called the call of Abraham. And Abraham was way over in the east in Mesopotamia, which is now the area of Iraq. And he was living in this place called Ur, which is spelled U-R, in Ur. And old Abraham and his wife, well, his name was Abram at the time, and his wife Sarai, they were elderly and sterile. They couldn't have any children, but God spoke to him and said, "Go from your country and go into a land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and you'll have many children. I'll bless you." And so Abraham had faith, and he went. And so Abraham, of course, becomes, the father. Eventually, he does have a son, as we're going to see, and a great family and descendants. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then Jacob had 12 sons, and it became the 12 tribes in Israel and a kingdom. So it all began with Abraham. And so that's what we'll see as we continue to read. I'd just like to point out something that you find in the story of the people of God is it repeats. It's kind of a repetition, and it's often this sort of theme of coming back or coming into the Holy Land, which of course is a sort of a symbol of our journey toward heaven. But what happens to Abraham, where he goes to the Holy Land, and then then there's a famine, and he has to go down to Egypt, and Egypt is a place of wealth, and there's kind of adventures that he has there, and he gets in with the Pharaoh and becomes kind of famous because his wife is so beautiful, and he passes her off as his sister, and but basically this thing that for God's people things go well and they kind of rise to the top of society. We see it in the story of Daniel. We see it in the story of Joseph at the end of Genesis, and we're going to see it in the book of Exodus too. The same thing happens to Abraham as later happens to the whole Jewish people, as they all have to go down to Egypt, and then there's a kind of persecution, and then there's plagues and such thing. These things kind of repeat, and God rescues Abraham or brings him out of there, and the same thing happens. Abraham is in about the 19 centuries before Christ, and then the Exodus, when the Israelites are down in Egypt, it's about 1,200 years before Christ. And then, of course, when Jesus himself is born, he also, as we know in the story of Christmas, has to flee from Herod and goes down into Egypt as well. So what happened to Abraham later happened to the whole people of Israel. They all went down to Egypt. And then it also happened to Jesus himself. And so it's kind of it's called typology, where Abraham is a symbol of the whole people of God. And Jesus Christ, of course, also is the embodiment of God's people. I have brought my son out of Egypt. God brings his people, and he brings his son out of Egypt, out of that place of slavery and worldliness, through the desert into the promised land. And so that's a theme that we constantly see in the Bible.